What's going on YouTube? Bryce Crispy 94 here, bringing you another miniature painting video. And today I'm going to teach you guys how to paint this lovely earth elemental here. This is an Epic Miniatures earth elemental. I prefer it over the WizKids design only because it's just got a little more detail. It's got, you know, the vine kind of growing up through it, plus it's holding the tree. Its base is very pretty as well. So yeah, all in all, really cool model. Primed it in gray. Kind of regret priming it in gray, and I'll talk about that in a second. But for those of you who don't know, this was the community voted miniature for the month of August. So if you didn't want to see this, sorry. If you did, here it is. Now, let's talk about paint. So like I said, I primed it gray, and then as I was looking at it, I kind of regret it. So I'm going to take matte black, and we're going to paint all the rocks. Yep. Literally the entire model in black. And then this rock and some of the other rocks, just to give them a little bit of a darker tone. So that will be our step one. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to, but that will be our step one. But before we paint these pretty bushes and stuff here, yeah, we're just gonna go ahead and get them out of here. And the reason for that is I think it'll look better with some army painters. I don't even know my grass. Yeah, just some army painter tufts. You don't have to use the Deadland tufts. I haven't decided on what tufts I'll use, but I'll go over it in a step. Now, some resin to clean up. Got to reprime those areas, but yeah, pretty easy to get that done, and they kind of leave a little bit of rocky looks to them, and then we'll slap those tufts on there and really make this base pop out. So let's get to painting. For this first step, we'll be taking our matte black and covering the majority of our earth elemental. We want to do everything except for the vines, trying to avoid the vines on him as best as possible. Also, we're going to go ahead and mark up some of the rocks on the base. Now that we have our black base coat, we're going to take our Vallejo Dead White and we're just going to cover the vines. Be sure to keep your Vallejo handy, well, your Vallejo White handy, in case you accidentally get a little bit of color on the vines throughout the next step. So we want to keep them as white as possible, but it's okay to have different shades, as later on that will help us with our vines. While we have the Vallejo White handy, we're going to take a little bit with our dry brush, and then we're going to dry brush our logs. So we'll be doing the log he's holding and the 2 logs on the base, as well as some of the rocks. This will just help with the speed paints once we get to that step. If you get a little bit on his hands, don't worry. It shouldn't shine through. It is just a dry brush that will be covered up with some pretty dark colors later on. Now it's time to start adding some color to this model besides black and white. So we're going to start with gray. We're just going to take our Army Painter's Dungeon Stone and we're going to do his joint areas. So under his armpits and his elbows, that area there. We're also going to do his leg joints, and then we're just going to select some stones on his back and front and a little bit on his face because I want that to be a little lighter as it shines through. This next step is entirely skippable. We're just going to take some of the Dungeon Stone and dry brush around the rest of the model, just kind of lighten it just a little bit in some of the higher areas. That'll help a little bit in the long run, but not a super huge amount, but it's still fun to do. For this step, we're going to add our first brown, and we're going to be using Army Painter's Dirt Brown, and we're going to cover everything on the Earth Elemental that we did not paint gray. So his back, his chest, the majority of his legs, his arms that almost look like gauntlets, and the tops of his shoulders. While our dirt spatter is drying, we're going to jump back down to the base, and we're going to cover the entirety of the base, not the logs, just the base, in Reaper's Shield Brown. Now that the paint is dry, hopefully, if you haven't let it dry 2 to 4 hours. Make sure that paint is really dry. I actually ended up letting mine dry overnight because I've had bad reactivations with washes. But we're going to take our brown wash and we're going to cover the entirety of the elemental, including the bits we painted gray, and then the base that we just painted. We really want the wash to sink into the deep recesses on the rocks. Once our wash is dry, we're going to come back in with the Shield Brown and do a nice dry brushing over the majority of the elemental itself. You can hit the grays, but just don't hit them super hard because you still want them to look a little gray. And if you get some of the dry brushing on the vine, that's okay. You can let that roll because our camo cloak, when we get to that step, will eventually cover it up and it'll make the vine look more realistic with some dry brown parts. Now it's time for our second dry brushing. We're going to switch over to Reaper's Driftwood Brown, and we're going to do just the tips of the rocks on the elemental. So on its knees, its elbows, the very tips of its shoulders and face, just to give those tips that nice light shine. Once we're done there, we're going to drop down to the base, and we're just going to give that a nice little dry brushing itself as well, just to give it some more color variation. Now it's time for our speed paints. The first speed paint we'll be using is Army Painter's Camo Cloak, and we're just going to use that vine that we've kept white with a little bit of brown. As we're doing this, make sure you want to paint in a downward motion. I know I'm guilty of not doing that all the time, but that will give you your best results. And try not to have too much of the speed paint on the brush, as you don't want it over seeping into the actual rocks. Now we're moving on to our second and final speed paint. We're going to be using Army Painter's Dark Wood to do the trees. Starting probably with the larger tree, just moving in a downward motion the whole time. Again, downward is best when it comes to speed paints. And remember, don't put a huge amount on your brush as you don't want it pooling. Now for our final step to complete the base of the model. We're just going to take some of Army Painter's Highland Tufts and Army Painter's Wasteland Tufts and just apply 3 or 4 of them around the base to give it just a little bit more of that realism. And we are back with the finished product, but before I reveal it, if you haven't already, hit that thumbs up button to let me know you enjoy the video, leave a comment to let me know how I'm doing, and subscribe if you're not already. So, this is the finished rock elemental, and I gotta say, really happy with how it turned out. I know when you're painting just a bunch of browns, you think that, how am I gonna bring life to this? But honestly, dry brush is your best friend. Not to mention, I really enjoy how the trees came out, and they were just a simple, you know, dark wood paint. I messed up a little bit right there, but that's whatever, you can hide it. Still 10 out of 10 for tabletop. I do want to talk about a couple things that one that I mentioned in the going through the steps. If you get too much brown on your white, don't worry about it. You can touch it up because you want this vine, you know, the speed paint's going to do what the speed paint does, and you're going to get the variation. So if you have a little bit of brown, you're just going to get a little bit of brown in your green, and that's not bad. I almost wish I had a little bit more brown in my green to make it kind of look like, you know, the root is dying. A little bit like how I did the roots down here. See them? I think those look really cool. Another thing, the eyes look okay, but they should have looked better. Again, mentioned it earlier in the steps. Paint your eyes when you put the gray paint on the face. That way, if you get a little bit up, you can, you know, soak the paint or soak the eyes, and then you can go around them with the gray. I did it afterwards, and it cost me. But other than that, I mean, you're looking at it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I really did. Can't wait to bring you some more. Again, this is an Epic Miniatures model. Link is in the description below, and I will see you guys next week for an Icons opening. Peace.